and they're pimps and whores because they can't write their own name to earn a living properly. They got to lean on somebody else, which brought about the title of Pimps and Whores.
Right. Frank Sinatra was the definition of cool, a legendary voice with a magnetic charm that could captivate millions. He was the chairman of the board, Old Blue Eyes, the undisputed king of a Hollywood built on glamour and swagger. But behind those, blue eyes and that million-dollar smile was a temper that could burn hotter than a Las Vegas stage light. His loyalty was a gift, but his wrath, that was a curse, capable of derailing careers and slamming the door on friendships forever. Now, to be clear, Sinatra never sat down and actually made a top 5 most hated list. But if he did, the names on that list would tell the story of a very different Hollywood, one of bitter rivalries and personal wars waged behind the velvet ropes. While he charmed the world, Sinatra was also keeping a mental scorecard of Hollywood's biggest names who he felt had crossed him. These weren't just petty squabbles, they were lifelong vendettas, rooted in betrayal, professional jealousy, and what he saw as profound personal insults. From on-set rivals to his closest friends turned enemies, these are 5 of Sinatra's most explosive feuds, and the deeply personal stories behind why he just couldn't let them go. Kicking off our list at number 5 is a man who never shared. A screen with Sinatra, never competed for a record deal, and yet managed to provoke a rage in the singer that became the stuff of Hollywood legend. This was Mario Puzo, the author of a little novel you might have heard of, The Godfather. The feud between them wasn't over a woman or a movie role, but something far more personal, a single character that Sinatra believed was a disgusting, unforgivable caricature of his entire life. That character was Johnny Fontane. In Puzo's novel, Fontane is a talented but fading crooner whose career is saved by his godfather, Vito Corleone. For Sinatra, this was like looking into a distorted mirror. For years, rumors had swirled that Sinatra's own monumental comeback, winning an Oscar for From Here to Eternity, was helped by his alleged connections to organized crime. He had fought his whole life to be seen as a legitimate artist, only for Puzo to reduce his hard-won success to what he saw as a cheap gangster cliché. The Johnny Fontane character wasn't just fiction. It was a public branding iron, searing the very rumors Sinatra loathed onto his legacy. Sinatra fiercely guarded his public image and was intensely sensitive about the constant whispers linking him to the mafia, which he publicly called a vicious lie. Yet here was a best-selling novel, soon to be a major motion picture, presenting a character the whole world would immediately associate with him. While Puzo and director Francis Ford Coppola always maintained that Fontane was a composite of several entertainers, they also acknowledged the obvious parallels to Sinatra. The simmering rage finally boiled over one evening in 1970 at Chasen's, a legendary LA restaurant. Mario Puzo was dining with a friend when he spotted Sinatra across the room. Puzo's friend insisted on making an introduction, a disastrous miscalculation. As they approached, Sinatra refused to even look at Puzo, coldly stating, "I don't think so. I don't want to meet him." When Puzo tried to explain the introduction wasn't his idea, Sinatra unleashed a torrent of fury, reportedly screaming insults at the author that echoed through the hushed restaurant. While some dramatizations of the event get a little carried away, the reality was terrifying enough, with Sinatra allegedly telling Puzo he'd beat the hell out of him if he weren't so much older. The ultimate irony? Sinatra's very public and very aggressive reaction only cemented the link between himself and Johnny Fontane in the public's mind. His rage was a self-fulfilling prophecy. He hated the character because he felt it was an unfair link to the mob, yet his explosive behavior was, to many, exactly the kind of intimidation they associated with the world Puzo had written about. At number 4, we have a rivalry born not from direct insults, but from one of Sinatra's deepest fears, being replaced. The star in question was Eddie Fisher, a clean-cut crooner who exploded onto the scene in the early 1950s, just as Sinatra's own star was in a terrifying freefall. To understand the bad blood, you have to picture the early 50s. Frank's career was on life support. His vocal cords had hemorrhaged, his records weren't selling, and Columbia Records had dropped him. He was seen as a relic. And into this vacuum stepped Eddie Fisher. Fisher was young, fresh, and churning out hit after hit. He was the new idol, and for a struggling Sinatra, every one of Fisher's successes felt like another nail in his career's coffin. But professional jealousy soon curdled into deep personal animosity, and the catalyst was Elizabeth Taylor. Eddie Fisher was married to actress Debbie Reynolds, America's sweetheart. Sinatra was friends with them both. Then, in 1957, film producer Mike Todd, one of Sinatra's dearest friends, was killed in a plane crash. Todd was married to Elizabeth Taylor. In the aftermath, Eddie Fisher began consoling the grieving widow, and that consolation quickly blossomed into a scandalous affair that rocked Hollywood. Fisher left Debbie Reynolds for Elizabeth Taylor, creating one of Hollywood's most infamous love triangles. For Sinatra, this was a profound betrayal. He was fiercely protective of Taylor, his late friend's widow, and loyal to Reynolds. In his eyes, Fisher wasn't just a career rival anymore. He was a man without a moral compass. The professional rivalry had become a bitter personal grudge. The end of this story is a perfect example of Sinatra's personal philosophy. The best revenge is massive success. Just as it seemed he was done, Sinatra staged the greatest comeback in entertainment history. His Oscar-winning performance in From Here to Eternity relaunched him into a stratosphere of stardom even higher than before. And Eddie Fisher, his career, once so bright, was irrevocably tarnished by the scandal. His hit-making days dwindled and he never regained his former fame. Sinatra got the last laugh, not by seeking revenge, but simply by out-surviving and out-succeeding his rival. We're only at number 4, and the stories are already this intense. From literary feuds to shocking scandals, Sinatra's list of enemies is a walk through history. Before we get to a feud involving the most powerful political family in America and a sledgehammer, take a second to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what's coming. And let us know in the comments, who do you think deserves the number 1 spot? For our number 3 spot, the object of Sinatra's contempt wasn't a single person. It was bigger. It was a sound, a look, an entire generation. It was the 1960s counterculture and its 4 primary ambassadors, the Beatles. This was a culture, war, with Sinatra as the defiant king of the establishment, staring down a musical revolution he just didn't get. In the mid-1960s, Sinatra was the epitome of sophisticated cool. Then, the British invasion happened. Suddenly, the airwaves were filled with electric guitars and 4 young men from Liverpool with mops of hair thick enough to hide a crate of melons, as Sinatra once quipped. He famously called rock and roll the most brutal, ugly, desperate, vicious form of expression it has been my misfortune to hear. He dismissed the Beatles as vulgar nincompoops and their music as simplistic noise. This was a battle for the soul of pop culture. The world was changing, and it was changing without his permission. His disdain wasn't just talk. The long hair, the casual clothes, the drug culture, it all represented a rejection of the discipline and order that defined his world. There are even unconfirmed rumors that his frustration with the new cultural order led him to use his connections to intimidate other popular bands of the era. Whether true or not, the story shows the depth of his feeling that his world was under siege. He was losing cultural relevance, and for a man like Sinatra, that was a fate worse than death. But here's the beautiful irony. Even the stubborn Frank Sinatra eventually had to bow, at least a little, to the sheer talent of his rivals. The cretinous goons were writing some of the most enduring songs of the 20th century, and a master interpreter like Sinatra couldn't ignore greatness forever. He famously began performing the George Harrison-penned masterpiece, Something. in his live shows, often introducing it as the greatest love song ever written. In a classic Sinatra move, he almost always misattributed it to Lennon and McCartney. But Harrison was reportedly just amused his work was being championed by one of history's greatest voices. It was a strategic concession, an admission that, while he would always be the chairman of the boardroom now had some new and very powerful members. The feud at our number 2 spot is perhaps the most tragic of them all. It's a story of brotherhood, betrayal, and the brutal, unforgiving nature of Sinatra's wrath. The man in the storm was Peter Lawford, an actor who wasn't just a Rat Pack member, but also the brother-in-law of President John F. Kennedy. That connection, Lawford's greatest asset, would lead to his total destruction at Sinatra's hands. In the early 60s, Lawford was Sinatra's golden link to the power he craved in Washington. Sinatra threw himself into JFK's 1960 presidential campaign, fundraising, performing, and proudly calling Lawford his brother-in-Lawford. The peak of this ambition was to be a presidential visit to Sinatra's lavish Palm Springs home in 1962. Sinatra went all out, even building a helipad to welcome Marine One. This was to be his ultimate moment of triumph. And then, the dream shattered. At the last minute, the visit was canceled. The reason? JFK's brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, was deeply concerned about Sinatra's rumored ties to mob figures. A presidential visit was deemed a political liability. To add insult to injury, the president's stay was rerouted to the home of Bing Crosby, one of Sinatra's old rivals. The terrible task of delivering this news fell to Peter Lawford. Sinatra's reaction was volcanic. In his mind, this wasn't politics. It was a personal betrayal. He believed Lawford should have fought for him. In a fit of rage, legend has it that Sinatra took a sledgehammer and personally destroyed the new helipad. But that wasn't the only thing he destroyed. He also destroyed Peter Lawford. The banishment was swift and absolute. Lawford was excommunicated from the Rat Pack. His role in the upcoming film, Robin and the Seven Hoods, was given to Bing Crosby. Phone calls went unanswered. Dean Martin later said that from that day on, Frank considered Peter Lawford to be dead. The consequences were catastrophic. Lawford's career, cast out by both the Kennedys and Sinatra, went into a tailspin. He died in 1984, a broken man. Sinatra never spoke his name again. For him, loyalty was everything, and the punishment for betrayal wasn't just exile, it was complete erasure. And now, the number 1 spot. This wasn't just a feud. It was a clash of titans, a collision of two opposing philosophies that defined a changing Hollywood. It was old school versus new school. The consummate pro versus the rebellious genius. Frank Sinatra versus Marlon Brando. The war began on the set of the 1955 musical Guys and Dolls. Sinatra was cast as gambler Nathan Detroit. The lead role of Sky Masterson, a singing role Sinatra felt he was born to play, went to Marlon Brando, an actor famous for his mumbling, method acting, and questionable singing voice. The resentment was immediate. Sinatra derisively nicknamed Brando Mr. Mumbles and made no secret of his contempt for what he saw as an undisciplined, disrespectful approach to acting. The tension exploded during the infamous cheesecake scene. The scene was simple. Sinatra's character had to eat cheesecake while talking to Brando's. Sinatra, by all accounts, hated cheesecake. Brando, aware of this, decided to use his method as a weapon. Take after take, Brando would nail his performance, only to intentionally flub his very last line, forcing a reset. And with every new take came a fresh slice of cheesecake for a seething Sinatra. By the 9th take, Sinatra's temper snapped. He allegedly threw his plate to the ground and stormed off the set, utterly enraged. The next day, Brando delivered the scene perfectly on the first try. It was a calculated power play that Sinatra would never forget. The hatred forged on that set lasted a lifetime. They never worked together again. This feud was symbolic of a fundamental shift in Hollywood. Sinatra represented the old studio system built on charisma and professionalism. Brando represented a raw, psychological realism that would change acting forever. In the end, Brando's revolution won. Method acting became the new standard. According to his daughter Tina, Brando was one of the few people her father never forgave because he felt Brando had disrespected the very foundation of his life's work. The feud with Marlon Brando was number one because Brando wasn't just a rival. He was the living symbol of a future that was making Frank Sinatra feel like the past. And for Old Blue Eyes, there was no greater sin. So there you have it. From the writer who put his life on the page, to the pop singer he envied, to a cultural revolution that threatened his throne, to the friend who committed the ultimate betrayal, and finally to the acting genius who tortured him with cheesecake. These weren't just petty squabbles. They were epic conflicts that reveal the man behind the music, his insecurities, his unwavering demand for loyalty, and his volcanic temper. Frank Sinatra's voice may have been as smooth as velvet, but his grudges were as hard as stone, and he carried them to the very end. These stories are as much a part of his legacy as his songs, a reminder that in Hollywood's golden age, the drama behind the scenes was often more compelling than anything on screen. What Hollywood feud do you find the most scandalous? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this look into the dark side of the golden age, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching.